Chapter 9. The Right Question. The Mouse Council sent Furlough to collect Despereaux, and Furlough found his brother in the library, standing on top of the great open book, his tail wrapped tightly around his feet, his small body shivering. Despereaux was reading the story out loud to himself. He was reading from the beginning so that he could get to the end, where the reader was assured that the knight and the fair maiden lived together happily ever after. Despereaux wanted to read those words, happily ever after. He needed to say them aloud. He needed some assurance that this feeling he had for the Princess P, this love, would come to a good end. Also, he was reading the story as if it were a spell, and the words of it, spoken aloud, could make magic happen. "See here," said Furlough out loud to himself. He looked at his brother and then looked away. "This is just the kind of thing I'm talking about. This is exactly the kind of thing. What's he doing here, for cripe's sake? He's not eating the paper. He's talking to the paper. It's wrong, wrong, wrong." "Hey," he said to Despereaux. Despereaux kept reading. "Hey," shouted Furlough. "Despereaux, the Mouse Council wants you." "Pardon?" said Despereaux. He looked up from the book. "The Mouse Council has called you to sit with them." "Me?" said Despereaux. "You." "I'm busy right now," said Despereaux, and he bent his head again to the open book. Furlough sighed. "Ugh, jeez," he said. "Cripes! Nothing makes sense to this guy, nothing. I was right to turn him in. He's sick." Furlough crawled up the chair leg and then hopped onto the book. He sat next to Despereaux. He tapped him on the head once, twice. "Hey," he said, "the Mouse Council isn't asking, they're telling, they're commanding. You have to come with me right now." Despereaux turned to Furlough. "Do you know what love is?" he said. "Huh?" "Love." Furlough shook his head. "You're asking the wrong question," he said. "The question you should be asking is why the Mouse Council wants to see you." "There's somebody who loves me," said Despereaux, "and I love her, and that is the only thing that matters to me." "Somebody who loves you? Somebody who you love? What difference does that make? What matters is that you're in a lot of trouble with the Mouse Council." "Her name," said Despereaux, "is P." "What?" "The person who loves me, her name is P." "Cripes," said Furlough. "You're missing the whole point of everything here. You're missing the point of being a mouse. You're missing the point of being called to sit with a Mouse Council. You've got to come with me. It's the law. You've been called." Despereaux sighed. He reached out and touched the words of fair maiden in the book. He traced them with one paw, and then he put his paw to his mouth. "Cripes," said Furlough, "you're making a fool of yourself. Let's go." "I honor you," whispered Despereaux. "I honor you." And then, reader, he followed Furlough over the book and down the chair leg, and across the library floor to the waiting Mouse Council. He allowed his brother to lead him to his fate. Chapter 10. Good Reasons. The entire mouse community, as instructed by the most very honored head mouse, had gathered behind the wall to the castle ballroom. The members of the Mouse Council sat atop 3 bricks piled high, and spread out before them was every mouse, old and young, foolish and wise, who lived in the castle. They were all waiting for Despereaux. "Make way," said Furlough. "Here he is. I've got him. Make way." Furlough pushed through the crowd of mice. Despereaux clung to his brother's tail. "There he is," the mice whispered. "There he is. He's so small. They say he was born with his eyes open." Some of the mice pulled away from Despereaux in disgust, and others, thrill-seekers, reached out to touch him with a whisker or a paw. "The princess put a finger on him. They say he sat at the foot of the king." "It is simply not done," came the distinctive voice of Despereaux's Aunt Florence. Make way, shouted Furlough. "I have him right here. I have Despereaux Tilling, who has been called to sit with the Mouse Council." He led Despereaux to the front of the room. "Honored members of the Mouse Council," shouted Furlough, "I have brought you Despereaux Tilling, as you requested, to sit with you." He looked over his shoulder at Despereaux. "Let go of me," said Furlough. Despereaux dropped Furlough's tail. He looked up at the members of the Mouse Council. His father met his gaze and then shook his head and looked away. Despereaux turned and faced the sea of mice. "To the dungeon!" a voice cried out. "Straight to the dungeon with him!" Despereaux's head, which had been full of such delightful phrases as "happily ever after," and "lovely ears," and "I honor you," suddenly cleared. "Straight to the dungeon!" another voice shouted. "Enough!" said the most very honored head mouse. "This trial will be conducted in an orderly fashion. We will act civilized." He cleared his throat. He said to Despereaux, "Son, turn and look at me." Despereaux turned. He looked up into the head mouse's eyes. They were dark eyes, deep and sad and frightened. In looking into them, Despereaux's heart thudded once, twice. "Despereaux Tilling," said the head mouse. "Yes, sir," said Despereaux. "We, the 14 members of the Mouse Council, have discussed your behavior. First, we will give you a chance to defend yourself against these rumors of your egregious acts. Did you or did you not sit at the foot of the human king?" "I did," said Despereaux, "but I was listening to the music, sir. I was there to hear the song the king was singing." "To hear what?" "The song, sir. I was singing a song about the deep purple falling over Sleepy Garden walls." The head mouse shook his head. "Whatever you are talking about is beside the point. The question is this, and only this. Did you sit at the foot of the human king?" "I did, sir." The community of mice shifted their tails and paws and whiskers. They waited. "And did you allow the girl human, the princess, to touch you?" "Her name is P." "Never mind her name. Did you allow her to touch you?" "Yes, sir," said Despereaux. "I let her touch me. It felt good." A gasp arose from the assembled mice. Despereaux heard his mother's voice. "Mon Dieu! It is not the end of the world. It was a touch. What of it?" "It is simply not done," came Aunt Florence's voice from the crowd. "To the dungeon!" said a mouse in the front row. "Silence!" roared the most very honored head mouse. "Silence!" He looked down at Despereaux. "You, Despereaux Tilling, do you understand the sacred, never-to-be-broken rules of conduct for being a mouse?" "Yes, sir," said Despereaux. "I guess so, but—" "Did you break them?" "Yes, sir," said Despereaux. He raised his voice. "But I broke the rules for good reasons, because of music, and because of love." "Love!" said the head mouse. "Oh, cripes," said Furlough. "Here we go." "I love her, sir," said Despereaux. "We are not here to talk about love. This trial is not about love. This trial is about you being a mouse," shouted the most very honored head mouse from high atop the bricks, "and not acting like one." "Yes, sir," said Despereaux. "I know." "No, I don't think that you do know. And because you do not deny the charges, you must be punished. You are to be sent, as ancient castle mouse law decrees. To the dungeon. You are being sent to the rats." "That's right," shouted a mouse in the crowd. "That's the ticket." The dungeon? The rats? Despereaux's small heart sank all the way to the tip of his tail. There would be no light in the dungeon, no stained glass windows, no library, no books. There would be no Princess P. "But first," said the most very honored head mouse, "we will give you the chance to renounce your actions. We will allow you to go to the dungeon with a pure heart." "Renounce?" "Repent! Say that you are sorry you sat at the foot of the human king. Say that you are sorry you allowed the human princess to touch you. Say that you regret these actions." Despereaux felt hot and then cold and then hot again. Renounce her, renounce the princess. "Mon Dieu!" shouted his mother. "Son, do not act the fool. Renounce, repent." "What say you, Despereaux Tilling?" I say, no," whispered Despereaux. "What?" said the head mouse. "No," said Despereaux, and this time he did not whisper the word. "I am not sorry. I will not renounce my actions. I love her. I love the princess." There was a bellow of collective outrage. The whole mouse community surged toward Despereaux. The mice seemed to become one angry body with hundreds of tails and thousands of whiskers and one huge, angry mouth opening and closing and opening and closing, saying over and over again, "To the dungeon, to the dungeon, to the dungeon." The words pounded through Despereaux's body with each beat of his heart. "Very well," said the most very honored head mouse. "You will die, then, with a black heart. Threadmaster," he called, "bring out the thread." Despereaux marveled at his own bravery. He admired his own defiance, and then, reader, he fainted. Chapter 11. The Threadmaster Cometh. When Despereaux came to, he heard the drum. His father was beating a rhythm that had much more boom and much less tat. Together, Lester and the drum produced an ominous sound that went something like this: boom, 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 tat, boom, 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 tat. "Make way for the thread!" cried a mouse who was pushing a wooden spool of red thread through the crowd. "Make way for the thread!" Boom, 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 tat went the drum. "To the dungeon!" shouted the mice. Despereaux lay on his back, blinking his eyes. How, he wondered, had things gone so terribly wrong? Wasn't it a good thing to love? In the story in the book, love was a very good thing, because the knight loved the fair maiden. He was able to rescue her. They lived happily ever after. It said so in the book. They were the last words on the page, happily ever after. Despereaux was certain that he had read exactly those words time and again. Lying on the floor with the drum beating and the mice shouting and the threadmaster calling out, "Make way, make way," Despereaux had a sudden chilling thought. Had some other mouse eaten the words that spoke the truth? Did the knight and their fair maiden really not live happily ever after? Reader, do you believe that there is such a thing as happily ever after? Or, like Despereaux, have you, too, begun to question the possibility of happy endings? "Happily ever after," whispered Despereaux. "Happily ever after," he said again as the spool of thread came to a stop beside him. "The thread, the thread, the thread," murmured the mice. "I'm sorry," said the mouse behind the spool, "but I have to ask you to stand up. I have to do my job." Despereaux got slowly to his feet. "On your hind legs, please," said the threadmaster. "It's the rules." Despereaux stood on his hind legs. "Thank you," said the mouse. "I appreciate it." While Despereaux watched, the threadmaster unwound a length of red thread from the spool and tied a loop. "Just enough for the neck," muttered the mouse. "No more, no less. That's what the last threadmaster taught me. Enough thread for the neck." He looked up at Despereaux and then back down at the loop of thread. "And you, my friend, have a small neck." The threadmaster raised his arms and put them around Despereaux's neck. He leaned in close, and Despereaux smelled celery. He could feel the threadmaster's breath in his ear as he worked at tightening the thread. "Is she beautiful?" the threadmaster whispered. "What?" said Despereaux. "Shh! Is the princess beautiful?" "The Princess P?" "Yes." "She is lovely beyond all imagining," said Despereaux. "Just right," the threadmaster said, and he drew back. He nodded his head. "A lovely princess just so, like a fairy tale, and you love her as a knight loves a maiden. You love her with a courtly love, a love that is based on bravery and courtesy and honor and devotion. Just so." "How do you know that?" Despereaux said. "How do you know about fairy tales?" "Shh!" The mouse leaned in close, and Despereaux smelled celery again, green and alive. "Be brave, my friend," whispered the threadmaster. "Be brave for the princess." And then he stepped back and turned and shouted, "Fellow mice, the thread has been tied. The thread has been knotted." A roar of approval went up from the crowd. "Ah!" Despereaux squared his shoulders. He made a decision. He would do as the threadmaster had suggested. He would be brave for the princess. Even if, reader, could it be true? There was no such thing as happily ever after. Chapter 12. Adieu. The sound of the drum changed again. The final tat disappeared, and it became nothing but boom. Boom, 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 boom. Lester used only his tail, bringing it down with great force and seriousness upon the drum. The threadmaster retreated. The room full of mice fell silent, expectant, waiting. And as Despereaux stood before them with the red thread around his neck and the 14 members of the Mouse Council perched on the bricks above him, 2 burly mice came forward. Black pieces of cloth covered their heads. There were slits for their eyes. "We," said the bigger of the 2 mice, "will escort you to the dungeon." "Despereaux!" Antoinette called. "Oh, my Despereaux!" Despereaux looked out into the crowd of mice and saw his mother. She was easy to spot. In honor of her youngest mouse being sent to the dungeon, she had put on a tremendous amount of makeup. Each of the hooded mice put a paw on Despereaux's shoulder. "It's time," said the one on the left, the first hood. Antoinette pushed her way through the crowd. "He is my son," she said. "I want to have a last word with my son." Despereaux looked at his mother. He concentrated on standing before her without trembling. He concentrated on not being a disappointment. "Please," said Antoinette, "what will happen to him? What will happen to my baby?" "Ma'am," said the first hood. His voice was deep and slow. "You don't want to know." "I want to know! I want to know! He is my child, the child of my heart, the last of my mice babies." The hooded mice said nothing. "Tell me," said Antoinette. "The rats," said the first. "The rats," said the second. Yes, oui, the rats, what of them?" "The rats will eat him," said the second hood. "Oh," said Antoinette. At the thought of being eaten by rats, Despereaux forgot about being brave. He forgot about not being a disappointment. He felt himself heading into another faint. But his mother, who had an excellent sense of dramatic timing, beat him to it. She executed a beautiful, flawless swoon, landing right at Despereaux's feet. "Now you've done it," said the first hood. "It doesn't matter," said the second. "Step over her. We have a job to do. Nobody's mother's going to stop us. To the dungeon." "To the dungeon," repeated the first hood, but his voice, so deep in a certain moment ago, now shook a tiny bit. He put a paw on Despereaux and tugged him forward, and the 2 hoods and Despereaux stepped over Antoinette. The crowd parted. The mice began to chant, "To the dungeon, to the dungeon, to the dungeon." The drumbeat continued, boom, 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 and Despereaux was led away. At the last moment, Antoinette came out of her faint and shouted one word to her child. The word, reader, was adieu. Do you know the definition of adieu? Don't bother with your dictionary. I will tell you. Adieu is the French word for farewell. Farewell is not the word that you would like to hear from your mother as you are being led to the dungeon by 2 oversized mice in black hoods. Words that you would like to hear are, "Take me instead. I will go to the dungeon in my son's place." There's a great deal of comfort in those words. But, reader, there is no comfort in the word farewell, even if you say it in French. Farewell is a word that, in any language, is full of sorrow. It is a word that promises absolutely nothing. Chapter 13, Perfidy Unlimited. Together, the 3 mice traveled down, down, down. The thread around Despereaux's neck was tight. He felt as if it was choking him. He tugged at it with one paw. "Don't touch the thread," barked the second hood. "Yeah," echoed the first hood. "Don't touch the thread." They moved quickly, and whenever Despereaux slowed, one of the 2 hoods poked him in the shoulder and told him to keep moving. They went through holes in the wall and down golden stairs. They went past rooms with doors that were closed and doors that were flung wide. The 3 mice traveled across the marble floors and under heavy velvet drapes. They moved through warm patches of sunlight and dark pools of shade. This, thought Despereaux, was the world he was leaving behind, the world that he knew and loved. And somewhere in it, the Princess P was laughing and smiling and clapping her hands to music, unaware of Despereaux's fate. That he would not be able to let the princess know what had become of him seemed suddenly unbearable to the mouse. "Would it be possible for me to have a last word with the princess?" Despereaux asked. "A word?" said the second hood. "You want a word with a human?" "I want to tell her what has happened to me." "Geez," said the first hood. He stopped and stamped a paw on the floor in frustration. "Cripes, you can't learn, can you?" The voice was terribly familiar to Despereaux. "Furlough?" he said. "What?" said the first hood irritably. Despereaux shuddered. His own brother was delivering him to the dungeon. His heart stopped beating and shrunk to a small, cold, disbelieving pebble. But then, just as quickly, it leapt alive again, beating with hope. "Furlough," Despereaux said, and he took one of his brother's paws in his own. "Please, let me go. Please, I'm your brother." Furlough rolled his eyes. He took his paw out of Despereaux's. "No," he said. "No way." "Please," said Despereaux. "No," said Furlough. "Rules are rules." Reader, do you recall the word perfidy? As our story progresses, perfidy becomes an ever more appropriate word, doesn't it? Perfidy was certainly the word that was in Despereaux's mind as the mice finally approached the narrow, steep stairs that led to the black hole of the dungeon. They stood, the 3 mice, 2 with hoods and 1 without, and contemplated the abyss before them. And then Furlough stood up on his hind legs and placed his right paw over his heart. "For the good of the castle mice," he announced to the darkness, "we deliver this day to the dungeon a mouse in need of punishment. He is, according to the laws we have established, wearing the red thread of death." "The red thread of death?" repeated Despereaux in a small voice. Wearing the red thread of death was a terrible phrase, but the mouse didn't have long to consider its implications because he was suddenly pushed from behind by the hooded mice. The push was a strong one, and it sent Despereaux flying down the stairs into the dungeon. As he tumbled, whisker over tail, through the darkness, there were only 2 words in his mind. One was perfidy. There's a picture of Despereaux and the 2 mice. And the other word that he clung to was P. Perfidy, P. Perfidy, P. These were the words that pinwheeled through Despereaux's mind as his body descended into the darkness. Chapter 14, Darkness. Despereaux lay on his back at the bottom of the steps and touched the bones in his body one by one. They were all there, and amazingly, they were unbroken. He got to his feet and became aware of a terrible, foul, extremely insulting smell. The dungeon, reader, stank. It stank of despair and suffering and hopelessness, which is to say that the dungeon smelled of rats. And it was so dark. Despereaux had never before encountered darkness so awful, so all-encompassing. The darkness had a physical presence, as if it were being all its own. The mouse held one small paw up in front of his whiskers. He could not see it. And he had that truly alarming thought that perhaps he, Despereaux Tilling, did not even exist. "Oh my!" he said out loud. His voice echoed in the smelly darkness. "Perfidy," said Despereaux, just to hear his voice again, just to assure himself that he did exist. "P," said Despereaux, and the name of his beloved was immediately swallowed up by the darkness. He shivered, he shook, he sneezed. Whoosh! His teeth chattered. He longed for his handkerchief. He grabbed hold of his tail. It took him a long, frightening moment to even locate his tail, so absolute was the darkness. To have something, anything, to hold on to. He considered fainting. He deemed it the only reasonable response to the situation in which he found himself. But then he remembered the words of the threadmaster: honor, courtesy, devotion, and bravery. "I will be brave," thought Despereaux. "I will try to be brave like a knight in shining armor. I will be brave for the Princess P." How best for him to be brave? He cleared his throat. He let go of his tail. He stood up straighter. "Once upon a time," he said out loud to the darkness. He said these words because they were the best, the most powerful words that he knew, and just the saying of them comforted him. "Once upon a time," he said again, feeling a tiny bit braver, "there was a knight, and he wore always an armor of shining silver." "Once upon a time," boomed a voice from the darkness, "a knight in shining armor? What does a mouse know of such things?" The voice, the loudest voice that Despereaux had ever heard, could only, he assumed, belong to the world's largest rat. Despereaux's small, overworked heart stopped beating, and for the second time that day, the mouse fainted. Chapter 15, Light. When Despereaux awoke, he was cupped in the large calloused hand of a human, and he was staring into the fire of one match. and beyond the match there was a large dark eye looking directly at him. "A mouse with red thread," boomed the voice. "Oh yes, Gregory knows the way of mice and rats. Gregory knows, and Gregory has his own thread marking him. See here, mouse." And the match was held to a candle, and the candle sputtered to life, and Despereaux saw that there was a rope tied around the man's ankle. "Here is the difference between us. Gregory's rope saves him, and your thread will be the death of you." The man blew the candle out, and the darkness descended, and the man's hand closed more tightly around Despereaux, and Despereaux felt his beleaguered heart start up a crazy rhythm of fear. "Who are you?" he whispered. "The answer to that question, mouse, is Gregory. You are talking to Gregory the jailer, who has been buried here, keeping watch over his dungeon for decades, for centuries, for eons, for eternities. You are talking to Gregory the jailer, who, in the richest of ironies, is nothing but a prisoner here himself." "Oh," said Despereaux. May I get down, Gregory?" "The mouse wants to know if Gregory the jailer will put him down and let him go." "Listen to Gregory, mouse. You do not want to be let go. Here in this dungeon you are in the treacherous dark heart of the world. And if Gregory was to release you, the twistings and turnings and dead ends and false doorways of this place would swallow you for all eternity. Only Gregory and the rats can find their way through this maze. The rats because they know, because the way of it mirrors their own dark hearts. And Gregory because the rope is forever tied to his ankle to guide him back to the beginning. Gregory would let you go, but you would only beg him to take you up again. The rats are coming for you, you see." "They are?" "Listen," said Gregory. "You can hear their tails dragging through the muck and filth. You can hear them filing their nails and teeth. They are coming for you. They are coming to take you apart, piece by piece." Despereaux listened, and he was quite certain that he heard the nails and teeth of the rats, the sound of sharp things being made sharper still. "They will strip all the fur from your flesh, and all the flesh from your bones. When they are done with you, there will be nothing left except red thread. Red thread and bones. Gregory has seen it many times, the tragic end of a mouse." "But I need to live," said Despereaux. "I can't die." "You cannot die? Ah, that is lovely. He says he cannot die." Gregory closed his hand more tightly around Despereaux. "And why would that be, mouse? Why is it that you cannot die?" "Because I am in love. I love somebody, and it is my duty to serve her." "Love," said Gregory. "Love. Hark you, I will show you the twisted results of love." Another match was struck. The candle was lit again. Gregory held it up so that its flame illuminated a massive, towering, teetering pile of spoons and kettles and soup bowls. "Look on that, mouse," said Gregory. "That is a monument of the foolishness of love." "What is it?" asked Despereaux. He stared at the great tower that reached up, up, up into the blackness. "What it looks like. Spoons, bowls, kettles, all of them gathered here as hard evidence of the pain of loving a living thing. The king loved the queen, and the queen died. This monstrosity, this junk heap, is the result of love." "I don't understand," said Despereaux. "And you will not understand until you lose what you love. But enough about love," said Gregory. He blew out the candle. "We will talk instead about your life, and how Gregory will save it if you desire." "Why would you save me?" Despereaux asked. "Have you saved any of the other mice?" "Never," said Gregory. "Not once." "Why would you save me then?" "Because you, mouse, can tell Gregory a story. Stories are light. Light is precious in a world so dark. Begin at the beginning. Tell Gregory a story. Make some light." And because Despereaux wanted very much to live, he said, "Once upon a time." "Yes," said Gregory happily. He raised his hand higher, and then held still until Despereaux's whiskers brushed against his leathery, time-worn ear. "Go on, mouse," he said. "Tell Gregory a story." And it was in this way that Despereaux became the only mouse sent to the dungeon whom the rats did not reduce to a pile of bones and a piece of red thread. It was this way that Despereaux was saved. Reader, if you don't mind, that is where we will leave our small mouse for now, in the dark of the dungeon, in the hand of an old jailer, telling a story to save himself. It is time for us to turn our attention elsewhere, time for us, reader, to speak of rats, and of one rat in particular. This is the end of the first book. This is Gregory telling Despereaux to tell him a story. Next is the second book, Chiaroscuro.